Hey, it's Cassidy, your friendly internet tired writer here. I'm tired, I'm a writer, you get it. I guess yellow and blue are positive colors, so... Lately, I've been wanting to tell more positive stories. I think it's because of two reasons. One, because I'm playing Xenoblade Chronicles 3, a story that is inherently positive despite dealing with some very dark themes, like how society doesn't evolve, it's just different versions of the same thing, and how people fight for how they believe in, but it turns out what they believe in is a lie, and the inevitability of death. And two, I've been actively trying to be more positive of a person because, no, negativity and pessimism are not quirky personality traits. Wish I figured that out sooner. I have been feeling the need for more positive stories lately. I think there's been a huge tilt in the landscape of stories, whether it's books or movies, TV shows, whatever, towards negative stories with negative outcomes. And there is a hole where the positivity used to be, and maybe even a price to pay for including positivity in your stories. Like, we live in a pretty grim, dark reality right now. So, with that being said, where did all the positivity go? I think we can credit Game of Thrones for this. Okay, maybe not just Game of Thrones, but definitely stories like it. With the rise of bad guy main characters and morally gray characters and anti-heroes and realistic characters, positivity is getting harder and harder to find. Now, some of these are for obvious reasons. Morally gray characters operate in an area of good and bad, plus they often have a reason for being morally gray, which probably won't be all like, oh, I had such a great childhood and I've had no trauma and I've just had a perfect life. Yeah, perfection doesn't often lead to morally gray characters. No one is morally gray just for funsies, not even low-key. Hashtag daddy issues. Now, the bad guys and the anti-heroes, they're by definition more negative than other characters will be. You know, anti-heroes, they won't have the classic traits of a good hero character. So maybe optimism and nobility and hope. Realistic characters, though. That's the one you're probably like, Cassidy, what you talking about there? But here's the thing. We live in a society where realistic equals negative. Obviously, stories are built around conflict. That's just how it works. It's just what interests people, which is kind of disturbing when you think about it. But these days, unless you're Marvel or something, we can't have a good versus bad story even if the characters are well developed. It all needs to be muddled, gray, like we are obsessed with morally gray. I mean, have you seen how many playlists are on YouTube titled Feeling Like the Morally Gray Character, or It Will Make You Fall in Love with the Morally Gray Character, or Being Mortal Enemies with the Morally Gray Character? I've never listened to those. Why do we think that realistic characters need to be negative and depressing? Why do we find more interest in villains and anti-heroes than just regularly good people? Good people can have layers. I am an onion. I would argue most people are good people. Realistic people are often good people. A big factor in this shift is the two extremes. Especially in the fantasy genre, for decades it was dominated by the classic hero, the morally upright, the noble, the courageous, the knight in shining armor.
'Tis but a scratch.
Think Aragorn or Captain America. But that got old after a while, and readers and audiences started to crave more gritty and edgy characters, and authors started to want to explore the grittier and edgier characters.
Coincidence? I think not!
It felt like in that time, writers were ignoring an entire aspect of the human experience, only giving glimpses of it through villains and bad guys that were archetypes and stereotypes and really just caricatures of what the dark side of humanity is. Humanity is both positive and negative, light and dark, Sorry. Readers and audiences and writers wanted to explore the darker side of the human experience.
I just killed 3 of your favorite characters.
And now the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction. Now we want to follow Joker as he loses his mind, and characters aren't making it out of their stories alive, or at the very least, sane. Writers have the freedom, because they have an audience who wants it, to explore the messier and darker side of humanity. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I love killing characters as much as the next gal. You know, I think it's a good thing to shine a light on mental illness and disease and death and the parts of society and the world that we just don't like to talk about. It's good that we're talking about it. It's good that we see it in our stories. I mean, I love writing about dark and twisted things. But when most stories are about the dark and twisted things, they lose that punch, and the world of storytelling becomes dark and twisted.
Why did you bring Gandalf back from the dead? He should have stayed dead.
Number 1, how dare you?
By focusing on the negative, by focusing on telling stories around mental illness and disease and death and any other dark parts of humanity,
Being attractive is its own sort of prison.
the world of modern stories have become consumed by negativity. Instead of letting the pendulum swing back and forth in the middle to give a balance between the two, we've just stuck it to one side, and now we're trapped. You don't need to sacrifice realism for positivity. I think because the focus has been on mental health and illness and the messier side of the human psyche, a lot of people think that people are automatically going to have negative reactions to severe or traumatic circumstances. So when a character has a positive reaction to something traumatic, or at the very least doesn't fall apart, we think it's unrealistic. However, that's not necessarily true, because I am the arbiter of truth. Let's use soldiers and mental illness as an example. I think a lot of people assume that the majority of soldiers have some sort of mental illness because of the awareness surrounding it. But according to some research stats, 14 to 16% of US soldiers suffer from PTSD or depression. Now that's obviously a lot of people, but it's not the majority. I think it's fascinating the different kinds of reactions two people can have to the same circumstance. When facing the exact same traumatic situation, some people might develop PTSD and some might not. Also, I'm not a psychologist or therapist. My point here is that you don't need to sacrifice realism for positivity, because realism is not inherently negative. Let's look at Frodo from Lord of the Rings as an example. Now keep in mind, I have only watched the movies, I have not read the books. Yes, I am a heathen. Now there's probably different interpretations out there, but in my opinion, I see Frodo as having some form of post-traumatic stress post-War of the Ring. He has recurring pain around some of the anniversaries where he was inflicted with some of the wounds he got. And he literally leaves Middle-earth in hopes of repairing the damage done to his spirit by bearing the ring. I think if Lord of the Rings was written today, Frodo would not have gotten off so easy. He'd probably be suffering from severe PTS symptoms, might have some sort of addiction problem. I don't know. I could make a joke, but I'm not going to because I have been informed that that is insensitive. I think a modern author, after putting a character through what Frodo went through,
walking, roaming, hiking, more walking, and strolling.
I can't do this, Sam.
wouldn't have let him have such a positive end. Because that's the thing. Frodo is an inherently positive character. You wouldn't think he is, but he is. He takes on the tremendous burden of bearing the ring that scars his spirit in order to save the world. So Frodo believes that the world is worth saving, and he is, optimistic enough to take on that burden, because if he didn't think he could do it, why would he? It seems like a pretty smart character. And when he fails to let the ring go at the end in Mordor, when it finally corrupts him, he doesn't wallow in that failure. He keeps living life after the war. He becomes mayor in the books, I think, and, he's writing his autobiography. He's living his best life. And so at the end, when he realizes that he cannot truly heal unless he leaves Middle Earth, that's not him giving up. That's him moving on. That's him trying to make his life better. And that is also positive. It was sad, but it's a positive. And yeah, not everyone's going to recuperate like he did, but that doesn't make him less realistic. Overcoming hardships in the absence of negative, harmful reactions is not inherently unrealistic. It's just a different way of processing. And I feel like in an effort to focus on mental illness and the darker parts of humanity in modern stories, we've lost sight of that lately. Not everyone is mentally ill, not everyone is scarred, and not everyone gives in to the dark parts of themselves. I'm hanging in there. I want my fellow writers to understand this because I think that we are missing some positivity in our lives and in our stories. I think a lot of writers are hesitant to have their characters react positively to traumatic situations because they are afraid that their audience is going to call that character unrealistic. Because today, realism is highly valued by audiences. And audiences these days, myself included before I started to think a little deeper about it, seems to hold the belief that negative equals realistic, unrealistic equals positive. That wasn't the correct order, was it? The good news is that people are pretty good at figuring out who's genuine. So if you craft your characters well, give them flaws, depth, backstory, motivation, yada, 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 your readers should believe whatever reaction your character has as long as it's consistent with your characterization. The realism of your stories and characters does not depend on inherent negativity or inherent positivity. In other words, your characters don't have to have mental breakdowns every time something bad happens to them. They're fun to write, I know, but you don't need to do it. Not every time. Just not every time. If you do it a lot, then it just will lose all meaning. I have some editing to do, I think. Stories that are inherently positive. Now, while there is a trend with negative and dark stories, that doesn't mean that positive stories don't exist. But I do think that those stories are more often told by other cultures. And no, I am not talking about Marvel, okay? I'm not doing that in this video. No. In Western culture, things are looking pretty dark. But that's not the case for everywhere else in the world. Now, I wouldn't call myself a gamer because I'm not one, but there are some video games that I love. One in particular is the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise. A key aspect to the Xenoblade stories is their positivity. While the stories definitely explore dark themes like slavery, the inevitability of death, and how society struggles to evolve, they center around a group of people who become close friends, united against the enemy of the world, and they will do anything to save the world from that enemy. And even though bad things happen to them, they don't lose sight of their positivity and optimism. They fight until the goal is accomplished. And yeah, the main characters don't die. But that's not always a bad thing. I like a character death as much as the next person, but it's just not every story is like that, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it's unrealistic. Not everyone dies. Wait, 18 years old and you realize that everyone dies. Frick. Now, I admit, I used to think that it was too positive, that the main characters weren't affected in realistic ways. But as of 2 weeks ago, I don't think that's true anymore. I think the writers just decided to focus on characters that had more positive reactions to bad situations. And as I've been saying, that doesn't make them less realistic. I'm gonna beat this horse until it dies. No, wait, beat the dead horse. Okay. Noah, the main character of Xenoblade 3, is a very positive character. Dark things happen to him, but he retains his positivity. He does lose his mind for a few months, but he quickly regains his sanity once his hope is restored. And he's very much the same Noah we knew before the traumatic situation. Now let's look at Lord of the Rings again. Aragorn is like kind of edgy. I mean, he's emo. He's got some darkness in him. But he is still inherently positive. Even though he fights in giant battles and wars, he retains his hope and his optimism for the future. He doesn't snap. He doesn't lose his mind. I mean, in the final battle between Gondor and the armies of Sauron, he is literally giving the soldiers a pep talk. Like, he's not wallowing in despair. He is a positive character, and he doesn't lose that over the story. And that doesn't make him less realistic. His positive reactions fit with his character. He is noble and brave and believes in the good of people. So his reactions to severe situations are influenced by those traits. That's not saying a positive character can't have a negative reaction and vice versa, but a positive character can have a positive reaction.
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently.
And sometimes that is more realistic than whatever I said before. It all depends on who the character is, which really is all I really want to say about writing in general. Is just develop your characters, make sure they're consistent, and they'll be fine. They'll spread their wings and fly. The value of positive stories. I think everyone needs a dose of positivity. We live in an age where we can see all the bad things in the world at the tip of our fingers, sometimes without even looking for it, and I think we've become a bit jaded. Green. Jaded? Stories are a way we experience the world and better ourselves. So if they're just focused on the negative, then we are going to just focus on the negative. I mean, there's a reason that reading a depressing book will make you depressed. I'm not saying to get rid of inherently negative stories, but don't be scared to write a positive story. Don't be scared to write positive characters. Most people are morally good. Most people don't have severe mental health issues. Most people, and maybe I'm not as cynical as I thought I was, are inherently positive. But I guess it's not as fun to write about most people. I'm done ranting now. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Another reminder, this is all my opinion. I am not an expert at anything, but I am a writer, so I like to think I'm a little bit knowledgeable about some of the things I've talked about. But, don't take my word as gospel, but I am definitely correct. Now for some self-promo. I just stubbed my foot and it hurt. I have written 5 books. This is Before I Turn 18, a poetry/literary anthology about the transition from adolescence to adulthood. So if that interests you, then Amazon. This is a fantasy trilogy I wrote when I was 13, 14, and 15. Think Tolkien, but written by a teenager, because that's what 13, 14, and 15 means. Also Amazon. And this bad boy, We Shall Reap, is a standalone fantasy set in the same world as the trilogy, but written by an older teenager, so the writing quality will be a little bit better. Amazon. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.